So I found this thing. It was Our World in Data, which is really pretty interesting because we talk about some of the things about how economic growth is related to improving the standard of living. So this one has all of these little charts you can look at, like access to electricity versus GDP per capita. So you go down here and it gives you this little graph. And so you can see countries with low GDP per capita have a much, a lot of them, very few people have access to electricity. And then you go up here, the higher countries, they all have access. So that, it's not just about having stuff. It's about, what was one of these other ones? Life expectancy as it relates to GDP per capita. So you can see the countries with the higher GDP per capita have the highest life expectancy. The poorer countries with the lower GDP have lower life expectancies. And it's a very, you could go in on any of these, but there's a very direct relationship there. Literacy, I thought, was another good one. So, again, the poorer countries, less of their population is literate. The wealthier countries, you've got more people that are illiterate. And that, seems to go right about here in the middle. And what was the other one I wanted to look at? Oh, child mortality is a good one. And you can see that, again, the richer countries have a much lower mortality rate in children. The poor countries have a much higher rate. And so you can see these very direct relationships between some of the things we talk about with, self-reported life satisfaction was another one. Again, higher incomes, higher life satisfaction, lower incomes, lower life satisfaction. And so that's why, we talk about economic growth, but the reason it's so important is about quality of life. And so this has a whole bunch of things that you can kind of look at. Oh, medical doctors, the number of medical doctors per 1,000 people. And so it's not quite as direct as some of the other ones, but there's lots of different ways to look at how people, why growth is important and how we measure standard of living. This one's from the World Bank, and so this is just the annual growth rate for the whole world. And you can see this would be our dip in 2009. And then they have it for every country here too, and they have a little graph to show you what's going on with theirs. So you can kind of look at the growth rates per country. You could rank this by country, or you could rank it by growth rates. And so some of these people still have negative growth rates. And so the World Bank is tracking the growth rates for every single country. This is one I thought was really neat. So this is a map. There's a map in your textbook that's GDP per capita per country, but this is showing increases GDP growth rates by country. And so green, the dark green is 6% or more, and that's pretty rapid growth. The lighter green or the medium green is 3 to 6, which is pretty healthy growth. And then the light green is still growth. And then when we get orange or red, that's getting negative. And so 2005, you can see almost everybody's green here. We got growth going. We've got good growth going. The whole world economy is pretty much booming. And then we go 2006. That's still pretty good. 2007, you can see the United States there is getting orange. That's when we hit the financial crisis. And then you can see it just spread throughout the world there. That's kind of the ripple effect of our recession going through everybody else. And so then 2010, we're recovering. Everybody's recovering. It's everybody's green. We're going great. We're still slow growth, but we're growing here. Again, everybody's, 2013 now, it's back to most countries are doing okay. Here you've got some nice strong growth in sub-Saharan Africa and China, India. 2015, a couple people had some problems there. 2016, 17, 18, most people are green. You've got a couple of outliers there. 2019, everything's rolling along. Everybody's green. It's great. And then here's 2020. I mean, that is Right? I was like, oh my gosh, when I was watching this. Um, uh, China's still, you know, I mean, it's slow growth, but they're still, but yeah, just look at that. I mean, you go from, wow, everybody's going great to bam, like that. I mean, really fast. So, and I guess these
That's
are their
really
predictions for future growth rates in there, but those are just predictions. But it's like, whoa, whole world just goes red. So that's pretty
that's
wow.
almost ironic how
It is.
you always talk about how politics are involved with this class, and it's almost ironic how the virus where it started is how it's the only one growing and
I
things like that
it
around.
really is. It really is interesting. That's very noticeable here too, isn't it? But now I was reading one article that said the reason China is doing better than the rest of us is because they took it very seriously very early, and are still taking it seriously. And so, whereas a lot of the world, us especially, tried to pretend like it's not happening and just kind of ignore it for a while. And so they said because they acted so swiftly, that's why they were able to recover. And they still have very modest growth. You can see in this one it's 1.9. And this is
Yeah.
2020. This is their prediction for the year, which we don't have yet, you know, but it's based on what we've seen so far. So that's not tremendous growth, but at least they're not negative. And then also, not everybody, what do I say? Not everybody reports accurate numbers. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so there's two possibilities there. One is that they were just super efficient, and one is that they're not exactly telling the truth. So it's hard to say which one of those is the case. But yeah, it is pretty ironic, isn't it, that that's where it started, and now there's Um,
Or what's that? Egypt is doing well. It's weird to see how everything's red and just so few people are making it through.
yeah, it really is. You've got a couple people here, and again, they're modest growth rates. South Sudan is doing great. It's hard to say too why Egypt would be, and then you've got a couple of these guys here. It's hard to say why they would be Myanmar, Vietnam, and it could be how they handled it, or again, it is a projection, since 2020 is not done yet, but yeah, that one's pretty interesting too. Uh,
What's the country in South America that's doing well? That little green country.
Guyana.
That's
What
insane.
26.2? That is insane. Um, so part of this too could be if you look at some of the ones that are doing well, not all of them, but in the chapter we talk about how the poorer countries can achieve higher growth because they had so little to start with that if you add a little capital, they can see a big impact from a little investment, and so that skews it a little bit, but yeah, now I feel like I got to go look up and see what they're doing. And this
What's
guy, it's pretty good.
Was there a country, I forget which one it is that had like the hyper growth rate or something like that? Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Um, uh,
I forget. It's in South America.
oh, it could be them.
I remember it was before. It might have been Peru or something like that. I honestly forget.
So the
It was
hyper-growth
some
rate or the hyperinflation?
inflation. That's what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah. Venezuela has done that a couple times. Argentina has done that a couple times with like super high inflation. Um,
Would that affect them in their growth rate in something like this? I mean, I guess.
it's actually going to pull it down. If you have that hyperinflation, it makes it very, very hard to grow. So if you were already struggling and then you put a pandemic on top of it, it's going to make it very tough. But the hyperinflation will pull down their long-term growth because it makes it very hard. Again, for the long-term growth, you need the investment and the savings. And when you've got hyperinflation, that's going to deter your investment because rates are going crazy and people don't really want to do investments during that time. So that'll hurt you in the long run. I saw somebody that was traveling to Egypt, and they were like, they're just like pretending like it's not even there. You know, like everything's open, nobody's wearing masks and all that. And so maybe that's why they still have that growth rate, because they're just ignoring it. I don't know.
So for those countries that had the hyperinflation, would this possibly help their outcome? Because if they couldn't grow and now this is just slowing everything down, could it stop their inflation rate?
It should. It should slow down their inflation, because generally when we hit a recession, that makes unemployment worse, but it helps with inflation. It brings prices down. So it might be, generally we need strong monetary policy to get inflation under control, which we'll talk about in a few chapters in a few weeks. But a recession just automatically generally brings inflation down. Now, a lot of these countries have the hyperinflation because they have crazy monetary policies. And so, if it's natural inflation, then the recession brings it down naturally. If it's there because they're doing weird stuff with their money supply and their monetary policies, then the recession would help it, but it might not fix it. So it kind of depends how high they were and what really caused it. That's the other thing we get into when we look at policy, later on, to fix problems like unemployment and inflation and growth. But you have to figure out how you got there to know how to fix it. So, like I said, if it's kind of just like natural inflation, like most countries see during growth and expansion, then a recession will bring it back down. But if it's there because you were doing wacky stuff with your monetary policy, then the recession might not necessarily fix it. But it'll probably help it. It'll probably bring it down some.
At least a little bit.
Right. It'll probably still be high, but it should bring it down some. It should. But sometimes when you got these situations where the whole thing is so unnatural, like this, where the whole world is negative, sometimes the normal rules don't quite apply. So. We even saw in the United States, we had a really long period of growth. So we were growing from 2010 to 2019, until this hit. And so that's a long, long period of growth. 2009 really it started. So that's like 10 years of growth. Normally during that, after 10 years of growth, we would see some really high inflation. And it was a little, but not very high, which was really unusual. So, and we had really, really low unemployment, and usually that leads to high inflation. And so we weren't really seeing that follow quite the normal pattern, which was unusual. But then this happened, and that threw everything off again. So yeah, those were just some stuff I thought were interesting.